Hello, I'm James Fletcher, and I'll be presenting the inquiry for the next few months. Thanks for downloading this week's show. We thought we'd tackle something that people seem to be talking about more and more. So, if you're feeling alert and awake, let's go.
No sleep till Brooklyn!
We live in a world of YOLO and carpe diem. Just do it and sleep when I'm dead. There's so much to do. Working, commuting, caring, relationships, family and friends, emails, Facebook and Netflix. A life full of obligations and temptations, delivered on an ever-accelerating conveyor belt. And in a world of more, there's one thing we seem to get less and less of. Sleep. How are you, we ask friends. Tired, comes the answer. This week, scientists in Canada launched the largest ever study of how sleep deprivation affects the brain, amid concern we're experiencing what some call a global sleep crisis. One recent study estimated that sleep deprivation costs the US economy up to $400 billion a year. But was there ever a past where we got the perfect amount of undisturbed sleep? I'm James Fletcher, and in this week's inquiry on the BBC World Service, we're asking, have we always felt this tired?
Part 1. Deep sleep.
I was basically nocturnal for about 7 months. If you're going to do this type of work, you got to be a really hungry graduate student wanting to get your dissertation done.
This once sleepless student is David Sampson, now a freshly minted assistant professor at the University of Toronto, studying
Great apes, orangutans, chimpanzees, lemurs, as well as baboons, and recently I've been working with traditional human populations.
As an evolutionary biologist, David Sampson does fun things like travelling to remote locations, climbing trees, and
measuring about almost 2,000 hours of nighttime infrared videography that showed the orangutans in sleep.
The goal of all these late nights and orangutan sleep videos was to understand the link between evolution and sleep, in particular, whether there's anything unique about human sleep. Primates sleep anything between 9 and 16 hours, depending on their size and type. David Sampson used a model to predict how much we would expect humans to sleep if we hadn't evolved differently from the other great apes.
Humans should sleep 10.3 hours out of the 24-hour cycle. We obviously do not do that. We, on average, sleep 7 hours.
So there is something unique about human sleep, and not just that we sleep less than expected.
We have the greatest proportion of REM, this is deep sleep, out of any primate. REM, most often associated with dreaming. This stage gives you a host of benefits, such as memory consolidation and emotional regulation, but it's the deepest sleep you're going to have.
In short, we humans sleep for less time than our great ape cousins, but more deeply. So what set us on this different evolutionary course? David Sampson's research suggests the change happened around 1.8 million years ago, when our ancestors came down from the trees.
So once we got onto the ground, we had safer, more secure sleep sites. You're not at the whim of the vagaries of a gust of wind that could throw you out of the tree. With the advent of fire, of building huts, you could have controlled the temperature in your sleep environment pretty effectively.
Deeper sleep meant we were more effective during the day, and shorter sleep meant more time for us to do other things and achieve success as a species. A productivity combination which might sound familiar to modern ears.
One of the lessons that we can look at through an evolutionary lens is that there's always been something better to do for humans. You know, you could party at night, socialize, or create stone tools.
David Sampson's more recent work has focused on trying to understand what the sleeping patterns of our ancestors might have been like. To do this, he slapped what he calls super science Fitbits, monitors which measure sleep and activity, on the wrists of a hunter-gatherer tribe in Tanzania.
They are sleeping around 6.5 hours out of the 24-hour period at night. They're making up for a little bit of this with napping in the day. So I think we can safely say that 7 is probably what most are getting throughout the 24-hour cycle.
He asked the Tanzanian hunter-gatherers if they had any problems with their sleep.
And it was resoundingly no, they had no problems with their sleep. They slept fine.
David Sampson also tracked a subsistence agricultural society in Madagascar, and they got about the same amount of sleep, 7 hours. But there was a difference.
They were very dissatisfied with their sleep. Approximately 60% complained about their sleep versus almost none in the hunter-gatherers.
One clue as to why might lie in the fact that some of us like to stay up late and sleep late, while others are early to sleep, early to rise. We're owls and larks. David Sampson says the Madagascan farmers work to a rigid timetable, regardless of whether they're owls or larks. They're all up at a certain time, work set hours, and nap at a set time. The Tanzanian hunter-gatherers, on the other hand,
they get to choose. They have much more flexibility in terms of when they put in their work. That is somehow linked to the fact that they don't have these intrinsic sleep problems, even though they're not sleeping that much.
So have we always felt this tired? Our first expert witness has allowed us to travel back in time to see that sleep has been in competition with other activities ever since we came down from the trees. Whether we feel the impact might depend on how much control we have over our days.
We've been messing with this for a very long time. For most species, there's a drive to reduce sleep, but humans, because of the novel sleep context we found ourselves in, actually could.
But what if modern life has changed the way we sleep much more fundamentally? Time for our next expert witness.
Part 2. The Midnight Hour.
This is Roger E. Kirch. I am a professor of history at Virginia Tech in the United States.
And to begin at the beginning, how did you end up researching sleep?
With great reluctance.
In the mid-1980s, Roger E. Kirch was working on a book about nighttime in the pre-industrial world, before the invention of electric light.
I dreaded having to write about sleep because I incorrectly assumed that it was a universal constant. I struggled with how to make it appear interesting.
Like everyone else, Roger E. Kirch assumed humans had always slept as we do now, one single chunk of sleep. But while researching records of 17th century criminal cases in London,
I began coming across references to a first sleep, expressed as if this was a well-known phenomenon. And then, a bit less frequently, a second sleep, but more importantly, that people were up and about after midnight, doing anything and everything imaginable.
it was every historian's dream.
One of the most exciting moments in my life, honestly.
Roger E. Kirch had stumbled across something hiding in plain sight that completely upended our assumptions about how human beings had slept.
The dominant pattern of sleep in the Western world, arguably since time immemorial, was not the continuous slumber to which we aspire, if not always successfully today, but was segmented. A first sleep, followed by an interval of wakefulness of an hour or so, then followed by a second sleep, which lasted roughly until dawn.
The more he looked, the more references to segmented sleep he found, from antiquity to the 19th century.
Virtually every major European novelist, from Dickens to Tolstoy, refers to this pattern of sleep.
Sleep was no longer boring, and it was what people did in the period between the first sleep and the second that was most fascinating.
For some, it was an ideal time in which to meditate, reflect upon dreams from which many people would have just awakened. Never was there a time so quiet, so dark, and arguably so private. It was a prime time for conceiving children, and in the words of a 16th century French physician, Laurence Joubert, couples not only do it better, but enjoy it more.
They may have enjoyed the interlude, but what about the sleep? If our pre-industrial ancestors slept in 2 phases rather than the single sleep we currently practice, did they feel tired?
They did. They did, though not because their sleep was segmented. They talked about being tired. The impression one receives is that a significant portion of the population, because of sickness, environmental annoyances, bugs, suffered from sleep deprivation.
While our sleeping conditions improved from the 19th century onward, our habit of sleeping in 2 phases came under increasing threat. With the Industrial Revolution, time became money, efficiency and productivity were highly valued, and there was even a reform movement
known as the early rising movement, which essentially dictated that taking a second sleep was a waste of precious time.
For those who resisted these new ways, the 1851 Great Exhibition in London offered a solution.
A quote-unquote alarm bedstead for early risers. The front legs folded underneath after a bell sounded, thus depositing the sleeper upon his or her feet. And then, at the base of the bed, a cold bath can be placed if he is at all disposed to ensure being rapidly rendered wide awake.
So this bed at the appointed hour in the morning would dump you into a cold bath of water.
Precisely.
The alarm bedstead wasn't the only technology changing sleeping habits. More importantly, the Industrial Revolution had also brought artificial illumination.
Not only did the growth of artificial illumination expand night's waking hours, but there is widespread scientific agreement. The drive to sleep is extremely sensitive to artificial light. Just a few hours of exposure to artificial illumination can reset the human body clock.
And in terms of the impact of technology on sleep, artificial illumination was just the beginning.
Part 3. Sleep in crisis?
As you're listening to this, if people find themselves falling asleep or nodding off, I'll take no offence.
Professor Matthew Walker isn't like most guests we've had on the inquiry.
Knowing what I know about the relationship between sleep and memory, it's actually the greatest form of flattery for me if your listeners right now cannot resist the urge to strengthen what I'm telling them by falling asleep.
As director of the Sleep and Neuroimaging Laboratory at the University of California in Berkeley, there's not much Matthew Walker doesn't know about sleep and how it's changed.
Back in the 1940s, people were sleeping on average just a little bit over 8 hours a night. And now in the modern age, we're down to around 6.7, 6.8 hours a night. So that's a staggering loss of sleep. Within the space of just 70 years, we're now almost at the stage where we've lopped off 20% of that.
For adults, the modern world is full of things which reduce sleep. Caffeine, which keeps us awake. Alcohol, which fragments our sleep and suppresses dreaming. And although we've improved the conditions for sleeping, with everything from better mattresses to smoke-free homes, our controlled environment may also have created problems.
One which people may find surprising is central heating and central air conditioning. And so when the sun sets, temperature drops dramatically, and when the sun rises, it starts to pick back up. And our bodies expect that beautiful thermal lull. And what we have done is dislocate ourselves from the natural ebb and flow that tells us when it's time to sleep and actually helps us get to sleep.
And then there's technology. No longer just artificial light, but all sorts of devices with LED screens emitting a powerful form of blue light.
Now, that blue light, unfortunately, will put the brakes on the release of a hormone called melatonin at night. And melatonin signals when you should sleep. Technology also causes sleep procrastination. Midnight is the time when we think, well, we should probably send our last email. Let me just check Facebook one more time.
And to all this, we can add the modern offspring of the early rising movement we heard about in part 2. Economic and social pressure to work more, sleep less, be more like some famous world leaders.
How many hours a day are you working?
Long hours, right up till 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning.
What time do you get up?
5 o'clock.
I'll stay up until like 2 o'clock at night. So I wake up at a pretty reasonable hour, usually around 7.
You can exist on 4 hours of sleep a night. How do you do that?
You know, it becomes so much a habit that you find you can't sleep there much longer.
That was Donald Trump, Barack Obama and Margaret Thatcher. But should we be aspiring to be more like George W. Bush, who reportedly went to bed around 9 p.m. and got as much as 9 hours sleep each night?
Based on probably about 10,000 research study papers now, the number of people who can survive on 6 hours of sleep or less and show no impairment, rounded to a whole number and expressed as a percent, is 0.
Professor Walker says with anything less than 7 hours sleep, we start to see health consequences.
Every major disease that is killing us in the developed world, Alzheimer's, cancer, obesity, diabetes, anxiety, depression, suicidality, all of them have direct now and very strong causal links to deficient sleep.
So, have we always felt this tired?
I think the answer is no. If you survey people now, about 65% of people would say, yes, I feel as though I would like more sleep. But even back in the mid-1980s, only about 30% of people said, yes, I feel as though I'd like more sleep. And the reason is because they were getting more sleep then than we are now.
You may be less surprised now that Professor Walker invited you to fall asleep during his interview. But if science tells us we're not getting enough sleep, does it also allow us to dream that one day things might be different?
Part 4. Sleep no more.
It's not just about the sleeping less, it's about living more.
This is Jessa Gamble, science writer and dreamer of a time when we sleep and dream no more.
The longevity quest that humans have been on since time immemorial, this is a low-hanging fruit in that quest, because if you can extend your waking lifespan, you're extending the time in which you're present in your own life, and that's enormously appealing to me.
Jessa Gamble first came across the idea that one day humans might not need sleep while reading a science fiction book in high school, The Beggar's Trilogy by Nancy Kress.
It posited that there was a genetic fix for sleep. The world that she created had people who needed to sleep, who were this underclass, and then they were ruled over by these people who had this genetic manipulation and didn't need to sleep, the sleepless. Much later, I started to realize that there are people who are pursuing exactly this.
So Jessa Gamble began to research how scientists are pursuing this goal. For a long time, the US military has tried to stave off sleep, with stimulants from caffeine to powerful amphetamines. At one stage, they even had
an explicit goal, which is to enable soldiers to stay awake, alert, and effective for up to 7 consecutive days.
But even if they could achieve 7 days, the approach of delaying sleep is up against a big problem.
I mean, if sleep were useless, then it would have been the biggest mistake that evolution ever made. It clearly fulfills a function.
So to sleep less, we need to sleep better. Science needs to replicate the evolutionary leap that we heard about in Part 1. Some research has focused on getting people into the deepest phase of sleep faster.
They've shown that sleep latency, or the time that it takes to fall asleep, is cut down significantly if you have a warm face and warm hands. I mean, your grandmother could tell you with a hot water bottle that you might fall asleep faster.
What your grandmother probably couldn't tell you is how to make the key phase of deep sleep, or slow wave sleep, more efficient using this. That's pink noise, like the static sound of a radio between stations, with equal volume at all frequencies.
If you hear pulses of pink noise every second or so, that will prime your slow waves and make them stronger and make you more refreshed in the morning. So it's a little bit like pushing a child on a swing. They're swinging anyway, but if you push them, they go a little higher than they could on their own.
Even more sci-fi is the idea of transcranial magnetic stimulation, using a magnet to stimulate electric currents in the brain.
It's a little scary looking, but it amounts to magnetic pulses that will actually trigger those slow waves as soon as someone falls into stage 1 sleep. And that's quite exciting because it means that we have control over getting right into the good stuff.
This kind of technology is still bulky, speculative, and confined to the lab. But Jessa Gamble says there might be pink noise devices on the market in the near future.
People are talking about cutting off sort of 1 or 2 hours based on the existing technology. The ultimate kind of speculative scenario would be that we could develop something that would fulfill the function of sleep while we're actually awake. It would be like a plane that can do aerial refueling and never has to land. That's an exciting concept. I mean, I'm kind of a sci-fi kid, so I like those ideas. Who knows?
Have we always felt this tired? We've heard that it's in our nature to trade sleep for other things, but we're being stretched to the limit by technological and social change, which has disrupted both the traditional way we sleep and the amount of time we get to do it. It's no wonder we feel tired. Science may eventually free us from some need for sleep, but the good news is that there's a free, easy, and painless solution available right now. You've made it this far, so I won't be offended if you close your eyes, rest your head on a pillow, and drift off.
Pleasant dreams.
This edition of The Inquiry was presented by me, James Fletcher, and produced by Estelle Doyle and Sarah Shebier. It was mixed by James Beard, and the editor was Emma Rippon. We'd love to hear what you think of the program, so please review us wherever you get your podcast from, or get in touch via our Twitter account. Next week, we'll be asking, what's Qatar's story?